Welcome back to World of Warships with Bucketeer. And you may be asking yourself, didn't I just do a Pensacola review? Yes, I did. But since I put that review up, there have been some developments. I've learned a few more things about the mechanics of the game, and I'll get into those in a little bit. But I felt like to be truly fair to the Pensacola, that I needed to come back and make a little addition to my previous review. So what is it that made me come back and do this video? What did I learn? Well, I learned quite a bit about the shell mechanics of the game, specifically the terminal ballistics for when your shells connect with the target. And what was my problem? Well, I tried to apply my World of Tank knowledge to World of Warships. And this is where I need to probably put in a laugh track. World of Warships is a little bit more complicated when it comes to shell ballistics than World of Tanks. And what got to me was I assumed that the game treated all shells identical, that they were all the same as far as the game was concerned, and that's not the way it is. In fact, there are a lot of very important mechanics and numbers that are hidden from your view, which is a completely separate little issue that I have with wargaming. A lot of time they like to hide these so-called soft stats and not make them visible to the player, and it makes any kind of detailed analysis about these things very difficult unless you can get a hold of the actual data mined information. So what is it that I was wrong about? Well, American shells are considered to be super heavy. And what super heavy means is that the United States military, when they were taking a look at what they expected out of naval warfare in the future, is that they decided that since plunging fire at long range was going to be the primary way that ships were engaging each other, the best way to increase the penetration of your shells was to just make them heavier. So when they drop down onto the decks of ships, they're as heavy as possible, so they have as much kinetic energy as possible. Well, this is partially reflected in the game by the Krupp values of the shells, and Krupp is a shorthand way of saying the shell's penetration. American armor-piercing shells have tremendous penetration, but they also have something else that I didn't know about when I first made my Pensacola review, which is the auto bounce mechanic. Now, most ships, your AP shells, when they first hit the target, the game checks to see if they're going to bounce. Now, if the shell hits at an angle of anywhere from 0 to 45 degrees, it's not going to bounce. For everybody else, starting at 45 degrees and progressing linearly up to 60 degrees, you have an increasing chance to bounce. So at 46 degrees, you have, say, like a 6 or 7% chance to bounce, and at 60 degrees, you have a 100% chance to bounce. Well, American AP shells, their auto bounce doesn't even kick in until 60 degrees, at which point you go from 60 to 65, there's a linear increase in the chance to bounce, to where at 65 degrees, you're now at the full 100% chance to bounce. And I'm going to put up a graph demonstrating this, and pretty much everything underneath that orange line and above the blue we can just refer to as American exceptionalism. That's the area where other shells are going to be bouncing while the American shells are still getting penetration, and that does definitely give the Pensacola somewhat of an edge. It gives all American heavy cruisers an edge, but the Pensacola definitely has this. So when I was talking about the guns about the Pensacola and really giving them grief, that's not 100% accurate, because the guns are not really that terrible, but they're not that good. I mean, in my opinion, this improved auto bounce angle, it does have a significant effect if you're engaging another cruiser or really any ship that's angled. But the thing is that who are you going to be shooting armor-piercing shells at while they're angled? You're not going to be shooting them at battleships, because if you're firing armor-piercing at an angled battleship, you're going to get what you deserve, absolutely nothing. And you're not going to be firing armor-piercing at an angled destroyer, because you just load HE and you pepper them with HE. So you're really only going to be getting an advantage against other cruisers. And it's an advantage, but it's not such a monumental one that it really changes my opinion all that much. Alright, one of the big changes that came with patch 0.5.11 was the addition of the armor viewer to the game. This is something that I didn't have back when I first discussed the Pensacola in the review. So now that I got it, I just wanted to take a quick look at the Pensacola's armor to see what we were talking about. So let's turn on the armor viewer and have the game grab the camera. Alright, so the first thing we want to do is take a look at the Citadel. And here it is in all of its terrifying glory. We have the Citadel. Now, one of the first things you're going to notice right off the bat is part of the Citadel sits above the waterline. This rear section is below the waterline, and you only got a bit of this forward Citadel that peeks over the waterline. But your boiler rooms have a good Probably that's a good meter, meter and a half that juts up above the waterline, which makes it very vulnerable. On any ship, when you go into the armor view and you take a look at it and you see the citadel poking above the water, that's dangerous. Your ship's probably going to take a lot more citadels than usual. And what's worse, this area, this exposed section of the belt, is only 3 inches thick. So that's not going to stop anything. Certainly not cruiser or battleship caliber guns. It's really not going to do much except against destroyer guns. No, I mean from the broadside. If you get a pretty good angle on it, you can still get the bounces. But then again, as long as you're not overmatched, any armor can bounce. Now your 4 inches, which is the maximum thickness, is only here on the forward part of the citadel and on this rear section. These are the magazines of the ship, and that's where you have the 4 inches of belt armor. And it's still a fairly narrow section of armor, so you're really not getting a lot of protection on this ship. So that's pretty bad. And then what really causes a lot of the problems is when you take a look at the fore and aft ends. This fore end plating is only 16 millimeters, and it's the same thing with the aft. Now 16 millimeters is overmatched by a 228 millimeter gun. And if you've taken a look at the overpin mechanics, and you can find those in iChase's videos, what that means is that for any battleship caliber gun, they're going to act like this piece of armor is not even there. It's not going to bounce. It's not going to get slowed down. It's just going to act like this does not exist. And the problem is, this forward section of the citadel is only 65 millimeters thick. So you can imagine what's going to happen to any large caliber gun that goes through your bow and strikes that flat piece of citadel armor. It's just going to punch right through it. And from behind, it's actually even worse, because the magazine has 65 millimeters of armor, but your citadel's rear end is only 25 millimeters. You're just not going to be able to stop anything. This is why the Pensacola is known as, well, a floating citadel. It's just waiting to take the hits to get popped. So, and I'm not going to suggest that the Pensacola is particularly lightly armored and the other Tier 7 cruisers are running around like they're mini battleships. They're not. The other Tier 7 cruisers are fairly lightly armored as well, but you don't quite see the exposed citadels plus thin armor all around combinations that make the Pensacola so easy to take hits in. And that is really why this ship is such a glass cannon. It absolutely cannot take a single hit. Anything that comes in here that is not an auto bounce that hits anywhere in this 75% of the length of the ship is very likely to find a citadel. And that is a major problem for this ship. Be a major problem for any ship. So how does all this new information impact my opinion on the Pensacola? Well, the armor isn't a surprise. We already knew how bad her armor was and how prone she was to taking citadels. It's nice to see it clearly, but that doesn't really change my opinion at all. As far as the guns go, I was definitely too harsh on them. They're not nearly as bad as I made them out to be. I still don't think they're fantastic, but they're certainly guns that'll get the job done. So, on the whole, the Pensacola is a little bit better than I gave her credit for. But, does that make her good in my opinion? Well, no, not really. I'm still of the opinion that the Pensacola is not a very good Tier 7 cruiser, and honestly, the statistics bear that out. When you take a look at win rates and damage done, the Pensacola is at the bottom of both categories for all the Tier 7 cruisers, and not by a little bit, by a fairly substantial margin. So I think it's a pretty safe thing to say that the Pensacola could use a little love. I will go back and say that my original suggestion to give her that final refit where they chop down her tripod mast would probably fix most of the Pensacola's problems, because when you're the first ship spotted, you're the ship that everybody concentrates their fire on, and as we saw in the armor viewer, the Pensacola cannot take hits. If you remove that weakness that she has to just be instantaneously detected by KV-2s on Erlenberg, then the Pensacola is actually going to have a fighting chance in the game, and I think that would take care of things. In the end, though, she's still not the ship for me. And now that I've got this update to the last review made, I'm done with her. So, goodbye, Pensacola. Surely the next ship in the line can't be this bad, right? Right? Oh, Lord. This has been Bugateer. I'll catch you next time.